You are back with us on Open Your Eyes this morning, and you're just in time to catch our conversation with these wonderful ladies from Fragments of Hope. And they'll be talking to us about coral reef restoration. We have with us Lisa Carne, who is the Executive Director of Fragments of Hope. We also have Nicole Craig, who is the Country Coordinator for Healthy Reefs. And we have, topping it all off, Dr. Melanie McField, who's the Director of Healthy Reefs. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
I hear there is good news and there is bad news. And I know you guys have a preference to start off with the bad news so that people only remember the good news at the end. So what is happening with our beautiful reef in Belize?
Ready? In Belize?
Belize.
We wanted to come out today to talk about a new threat that the reef is facing in this area called Stony coral tissue loss disease. So we wanted to raise awareness locally because the threat is approaching Belize. It's not here as yet, but essentially the disease is one that started was noticed in 2014 in Florida, along the Florida Reef Tract, and since then it's made its way to other parts of the Caribbean and as close to us as Mexico along the Quintana Roo coast, near a border essentially. So at this point we want to just put the word out there that it is very close to Belize. What
does this threat look like?
What does it look like?
And what does it do?
Okay, so the disease is Stony coral tissue loss disease, which essentially means that a coral colony is going to slowly start to lose its tissue. It's going to die. The disease, we do not know what's causing it, but whatever it is that is causing it causes the tissue to begin to slowly die from the colony, turning it white, that you begin to see that skeleton, that white calcium carbonate skeleton. And unfortunately, the mortality rate of the disease is very high. Many colonies are seeing 66% or higher death. And it affects very specific species of coral. So we have images that show those vulnerable species here. What it looks like on the left is what it should be looking at like as a healthy colony, and then on the right what it looks like if it's been infected with stony coral tissue loss disease.
Maybe I'm doing an injustice.
Oh no.
To not go back to focus on what a reef is and the fact that it is a living organism.
Yeah, they look like rocks.
They look like beautifully colored, painted rocks.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're actually living.
Right. Living
can you
animals.
walk us through what is coral and what is apart from just being breathtakingly beautiful, the images I've seen. I've never seen it in real life.
What?
Never?
Yes, I've never, ever.
We must change this. We must change this.
Yes. But I'm also willing to wager that a large percentage of Belizeans haven't seen it live either.
Wow.
But what is coral and what is its purpose? What does it do?
Well, it's like the trees in a forest. So the corals actually give the structure to the reef. So we talk about a reef, but that's not just the coral. But the coral are the trees in a forest. So they give the habitat for all of the lobsters, the fish, and all the biodiversity that is hosted there. And the weird thing about them is they've got, like, you can see these little lines, that's like a brain corals.
Yeah.
They're full of these polyps. So they look kind of like the anemone in Finding Nemo,
yes,
right? But there's millions of those along each of these. And they capture food, and they have zooxanthellae, these symbionts. So they're plant and animal at the same time. It's a very interesting arrangement. So the coral gets its food largely from sunlight. But it's a very old organism. So they've got like their immune responses, and the way they fight disease is not very complex. So these coral diseases are something that's been around. We've known about them in the Caribbean since the 70s. One of the first ones was described here in Belize. But normally you'd see incident rates of disease of like maybe 3%. So about 3% of the colonies might have a disease. This particular disease, the reason we're so worried about it is prevalence rates get up to 40 to 60%.
Wow.
And it affects over 20 species of corals, whereas most diseases are limited to like a few species.
Right.
And the way it spreads is so fast. So it's devastating. It took about 5 years in Florida for it to get through the reef track. It was moving slowly. We don't really know why, maybe because there are not that many corals there. But the minute it jumped last year to these other places, it's now, the first one noted was Jamaica, then Mexico, around Cancun, then St. Martin, Dominican Republic, and U.S. Virgin Islands. So that's where it is now. We don't know. It's waterborne.
Yeah.
They've already tested 800 different microorganisms, bacteria and viruses. They think it's a bacteria. They're not sure. It's probably a suite of bacteria. So maybe you need two bad guys to make it happen. And it's like
on a reef.
Yeah, the perfect storm.
No, we're talking restoration and we're talking threats. Put us to the extreme, because maybe sometimes people can't appreciate what it is unless the extreme is what they're trying to fight off. What happens if the entire reef dies and we have no more reef?
Well, we didn't say exactly what we call ecosystem services. When we talk about ecosystem services, we mean what do these things provide for people, right?
Yeah.
So in addition to the beauty and the tourism value that we have here in Belize and the habitat for all the other animals she mentioned, the biggest protection services they provide is shoreline protection, because a living reef breaks up those barriers for the storms, and if it's not living, it's just going to crumble away and we have zero protection for storms. Wow. So that's huge. So it would be devastating not only for the tourism industry, our fisheries, but also our shoreline protection, and most of us are on the coast here in Belize, not all of us. But.
The threats to the reef itself, they're nature driven, or is man-made? Is man contributing to some of this disease that's been created, and what are we contributing to the damage to our reef?
May I?
Oh yeah. Wow, step back.
Thank you for asking that, because one of the take-home messages we really want to get across is there are certain things we can control and certain things we can't. So let's mitigate and control the threats that we have, right? So overharvesting is an issue, and Belize is doing really well with the amount of protected areas they have, co-management status for the protected areas. Climate change, global warming.
Sorry, when you say overharvesting of
fish, lobster, conch, everything. Everything's related in the reef ecosystem.
How does that affect the reef, though?
That affects the reef, for example, with corals. There are things that eat corals because they are living, so they have a living layer of tissue over them, that color that you see. And things that eat corals are like snails and certain worms, and the things that eat those things are things that we like to eat. So if we take out all of those things that eat the natural, so you have an imbalanced ecosystem, right? And so, for example, in the case of the endangered species that we work with, the critically endangered elkhorn and staghorn reef-building corals, they were wiped out about 30, 40 years ago down to barely 2% of their previous population levels. And so now in certain areas where there are no protection, like colleagues that I work with in the Caribbean, when they put these corals out, they're devoured immediately by the snails and the fireworms because their sites are not protected. They've been over-harvested by things that we like to eat. And in contrast to that, at Laughing Bird Key National Park here in Belize, in southern Belize, it's just a fully no-take, no extraction, protected national park for over 10 years. They're flourishing, and we've been able to increase coral cover from less than 6% to over 40% in just about 5 or 6 years. We do have some videos of that too. But so there is good news. And so getting back to the fisheries part, that's where we need that balance, because you need this fully intact ecosystem so that all your food webs are still intact. Otherwise, it's imbalanced.
As you're saying that, it reminds me of the little pest, the lionfish. How are we in terms of controlling that threat?
Let's list off the rest of those human threats, right?
Sorry.
So the lionfish is one. Invasive species in general is a threat, and that is generally considered man-made. It's either because someone in Florida had them in their aquarium and a hurricane came, or they were flushed down the toilet. And we know that they propagate so well here. There's no natural predators. There's no easy answer to that because they live down to 900 feet and they breed, they spawn like every 4 days. Wow. So most people are culling them, and we're encouraging people to eat them because they have excellent, really tasty white flesh. It's just kind of a pain cleaning them because they're small. But that's the best thing that we know how to do is overfish stuff, right? Yeah. So we should fish out the lionfish.
They're not exploding the way they were initially.
Right. So, and then pollution and runoff, of course. Thankfully, Belize is now implementing the ban on single-use plastics and
Yes.
styrofoam. That is a blessing. I'm not sure how long the phase-out process will be, but so what happens with that is those plastics can break down in the water and cause pollution, limiting water quality. Then there's sewage runoff. There's all types of man-made issues, agricultural runoff. Back to the climate change or global warming issues, most people are familiar with that in Belize from emissions, et cetera, et cetera. That can cause coral bleaching. The higher sea temperatures are linked to coral diseases. All bad stuff, all man-made. And some of these things we really can't control, for example, the climate change and global emissions, right? But what we can control is how we do coastal development and offshore key development. So when Dr. McField mentioned the dredging has been linked to certain coral diseases, that raises a red flag for us because we have a lot of unmitigated dredging and coastal development up and down our coast. As you know, everyone wants to fill a mangrove key and have a nice beach. So in my mind, there are things like that we can control. We can also control sunscreen. It's been shown now that there are certain harmful ingredients in sunscreen to corals themselves. So we can cover up. That's what we do at Fragments of Hope. We cover up with rash guards and face shields and hats. There are some reef-safe sunscreens out there, but they haven't been fully tested. So, at the minimum right now, they're asking consumers to read the back of the label, which is a little, confusing, big words and chemicals, right? So we just recommend you cover up. It's easier just to cover up.
A friend of mine was trying to explain what, for example, going to visit certain parts of the reef, like with 100 tourists with sunscreen on, being in an aquarium. And putting oil on your skin and jumping into the aquarium and having 50 of you in this little aquarium, and how it would affect.
You can see a sheen.
You can see a sheen over the top of it. But that's my next question. How do we sustainably balance the competing interests of the tourism industry, which is our number one earner nationally, and a healthy reef? How do we do that? How can we even restore a reef when every day, before, for example, if you were sick, you'd need at least one day away from work where you could go home, take some meds, go on a blanket, and then regenerate. How do we regenerate, restore the reef, and balance all of these threats at the same time?
May I?
Reduce
When she says, Mary, you better let her. You better
One
let
thing
her.
you didn't say much that I think is a big one, and it's under the control of the local population, is wastewater treatment.
Okay.
So when you can have tourism, and the tourists themselves are not the main problem. Yes, sometimes they kick, sometimes you can manage that. Their tour guides do a good job, or they can be trained to make sure tourists aren't standing on the reef and killing it. It's all the stuff that goes around it, the clearing of the land, which is under coastal zone management, right? That should be, if you implement the plans that you've made that are good plans, if you enforce them, then you'll have reasonable development on high land that's meant for development, not mangrove. And wastewater treatment and solid waste treatment. These things have to be planned. Just like you have to have roads and you have to have electricity, you have to have sewage, you have to have garbage collection, and you need zoning so you don't overdevelop. It can be done. It can be done.
I know Lisa's going to come out swinging on this one.
Yeah, well, I do want to address the tourism and big up Belize, because most people don't even realize that we're one of the few, I think maybe the only country in the Caribbean per se that actually has a licensed tour guide program. And so these people that are licensed tour guides, they go through an intensive training program about cultural aspects, terrestrial, marine, archaeological, 166 hours. They get police records, health checks every year. They have to pay for this renewal every year, and it is the law that all tourists must accompany a licensed tour guide with a licensed tour operator. A very good job of telling tourists that, right? I think we should big up the fact that we have these educated tour guides and we have this system in place. That's one thing. The other thing I wanted to mention is that what I would like to see is more communication between our different minister levels or different parts of government. For example, when getting a dredging permit, there's mines, which falls under natural ministry, which is not related to fisheries or forestry. Then there's DOE that controls a lot of things, right. And whether or not there's a EIA or a LLS, a lot of that's confusing. And going back to the tourism industry, if the tourism industry was also that ministry communicating with these decision makers, I think we would have a better holistic way to manage what we can manage sustainably. But right now everything's sort of a little bit like in different compartments,
Separate.
and we're not seeing, at least I'm not seeing on the ground, that big picture of discussion amongst all these things that are absolutely related, because of course we know tourism is a huge income earner for Belize, and we don't want to do things that are harming the tourism industry.
How would that ideally be done? You think there needs to be an interdepartmental task force or some sort of committee?
The coastal zone, it just needs to function. I mean, that's what the Coastal Zone Management Authority is. It's all of those high-level, CEOs on the board, and then that's where it's supposed to come together.
So there needs
So
to
we'll
be more
sponsor a field trip with everybody and bring them out to the reef so they can see it in person and then have that open dialogue.
So we have underperformance by the coastal zone management, you would think?
I don't know that it's
there's more that they can
underperformance.
do?
I just think it's not. It's just not working fully because the departments aren't talking to each other. But the structure is there, and it was passed. So it's just implementation. Maybe getting the wheels turning.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Speaking of these threats, where we have a very long, continuous, flowing reef. But where is the biggest threat to the new disease? Where are we finding the most loss of corals? Where is our biggest? Where's our ground zero?
Wow.
That's a good question because we recently did an exchange trip with several experts last year, brought them to Belize and did a tour from south to north, highlighting not only our restored sites, but what we have been mapping for over 10 years, specifically for the staghorn and the elkhorn, these large patches of healthy reefs, and over 50 meters is how I consider it, like a green dot on the map, like this big, beautiful stand. And this is a question I put to some of these genetic experts, and so we don't really have the answer to that because we can be swimming along the reef crest and it could be like dead, not very good looking, and then all of a sudden there's this vibrant, beautiful area. One easy answer I have though, if you look at the stretch of our barrier reef out in front of Dangriga, so in the Saltwater Key Marine Reserve, it's quite straight and there's several cuts that come down, and within those channels, on the edges of all those channels, it's thriving. And so when you think about it, that makes sense because the current is flowing there, larvae can settle there, there's continuous movement there. So when you're swimming along the straight stretch there, it's kind of depressing, it's not looking great. And then you get to the cuts and the channels and things are thriving again. So we don't have all the answers, but that's just one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's get some good news. It's not all bad. It's, apart from the fact that we still have this long, beautiful, living lady, I call her down there. There are good things happening. What are the good things happening, and what is the good news in terms of restoration and our reef?
Well, the great news in terms of restoration on our reef is that Lionfish Key National Park has been internationally recognized as the best example of true reef restoration in the Caribbean. So hopefully we have some video clips where we can show viewers and get a sense of that. But why it's been categorized as that is because we have been doing this work for over 10 years now, so the longevity. So we have our original transplants that are almost 13 years old. We have nursery-grown corals that are going for 8-9 years old now.
Nursery-grown corals.
Meaning we can actually propagate and grow more corals underwater in a nursery.
Wow.
Yes, so we've been doing that for 10 years now. And then it's also recognized as the best true restoration site because of the extent. So it's over 1 hectare of fringing reef around Laughing Bird Key National Park. As we mentioned earlier, corals are animals, so they can actually sexually reproduce. So the way we propagate them in the nurseries is asexual. Like you have certain plants you can take a clipping from and it will root again. Same way with some of these corals, but because they are animals, they can also sexually reproduce. And we have documented our nursery-grown corals out on the reef, sexually reproducing or spawning. So this is a huge success, meaning the reef is reseeding itself with our little boost. So for several reasons, Laughing Bird is now, recognized as the best restoration site, but we're not only there, we've now expanded to South Silt Key and the Gladden Spit and the Silt Key Marine Reserves, and I think we do have a map that shows dots on the map of Belize. We're all the way up in Saltwater Key Reserve, Marine Reserve at Saltwater, Tobacco in Turneff Marine Reserve, Turneff Atoll Marine Reserve, at Blackbird Key and Calabash Key, we have sites. And then near Placencia, where Fragments of Hope is based, we have about 6, 7, 10 different restored sites and over 23 nurseries throughout Belize, and we're looking to expand now to Puerto Honduras Marine Reserve, Zapadillo Keys, Key Cocker. So it's working. The point I want to make before you ask me one more question is that we can't restore everywhere, right? There's no way. As you mentioned earlier, we have the second longest barrier reef in the world. We have a lot of reef, right? And it does take time and patience and some funds. So what we have to do is be selective about where we choose to put our time and energy to restore those reefs. And we have a set of selection criteria that we've come up with. So we don't just randomly decide, right? So we have all of that on our website. It's a lot of technical information, but no, we cannot restore every single piece of reef.
And when you say restoration, you're talking about significant changes and improvements.
Absolutely.
You're talking from under 10% to, you were giving me some of the statistics earlier.
Right, so we had Hurricane Iris hit Laughing Bird Key and Placencia directly. That was Category 4. October 2001. It was a Monday.
Pride.
It was a Monday, not with pride. It's just like I'll never forget it. It was Category 4. It was 145-mile-an-hour winds that hit Placencia and Laughing Bird Key directly. And so after that event, and prior to that, we had Hurricane Mitch in 1998, and then we had bleaching and disease events. So with those impacts combined, there was less than 6% coral cover in the fringing
6%.
shallow reef, less than 6%, rubble basically from these impacts. And now we're at over 42% in some of these sites. So that's a huge difference, and we're working on quantifying not only the corals, but as Melanie mentioned, Dr. McField mentioned, all the other little critters that come in, the crabs, the lobsters, the nurse sharks, not, of course, the fish. So these corals provide habitat for everything you can think of.
Yeah. Dr. McField, how expensive is it to do these sorts of restorations?
Well, I mean, anytime you're out in the water and dealing with boats and divers, Lisa runs the restoration. We do more of the monitoring and, collaboration. And that, but the other point I wanted to make about success and what's the feel-good part of this, internationally, like this region of the Mesoamerican Reef and the collaboration that we have going on is viewed as a major success. Because we have, like in Healthy Reefs, we have 73 partners that are collaborating using standardized methods and monitoring the reef and talking about what we can do jointly. I mean, it provides a platform to help share successes. We've like, look what homegrown Belize, has figured out in terms of reef restoration, and now that's being shared quickly and easily in the region, and it'll go to the Caribbean really quickly. These networks and the people and the trained. I've worked now in other parts of the Caribbean that it's hard to find anybody that's trained that can do the work, and then even to get a little team of 6 that might go out and do field work, you can't do it. We've got so many people here in this region that know what they're doing. I think we're part of the solution. It's just this network of really good people that are trained and capable.
And while we're on the positives for Belize, remember Belize, were they not the first to protect parrotfish and surgeonfish, and now other countries are following?
First in our region,
First in our region, and these are important grazers that eat down the algae.
Honduras followed, then Guatemala, and now just Mexico did it.
So Lisa, could you give us an idea of how costly it is, and in saying how costly it is, or giving an estimation of how costly it is, can you also tell us the economic value of a healthy reef? Okay, are you able to tell us? Okay.
You can do the big numbers for the economic value. I can do the little numbers. Okay. There's huge numbers because you can look at the value. I mean, there was a study just for Belize done, but that's now 10 years old.
It's 10 years old, so take $1 billion per year, Belize, and that's for the whole reef, and then factor 10 years of inflation. I don't know what that would be.
So there's a specific study done just for Belize's ecosystem services, both reefs and mangroves, by the World Resources Institute. And Nadia Bood at WWF was an author on that, located here in Belize. But again, that's from 2008.
Yeah.
It was, it's a lot a year.
It was a range, but the billion is kind of in the middle. 500 million US was
Yeah.
the kind of the middle.
And this
point
is
of the range.
combining the tourism value, the shoreline protection value, and the nurseries for fisheries value. So it's a lot, it's a lot. But when it comes to actual numbers for restoration, that's everyone's favorite question. And it's difficult to answer because fuel is one of our biggest cost factors in Belize. And so it depends. We might have a near shore site that's only a few miles, or we go all the way to Turn F, 60 miles away. So fuel is a fluctuating factor. And so what I usually tell people, because they want to know that, how much does it cost to restore X amount of reef, right?
Yeah.
It's not that simple of a question. But for us, based in Placencia, we have, let's just call it round Placencia area. We go as far as 19 miles out to Gladden Spit. I mean, we do further sites as well. But on those ranges there, and even up to Saltwater Key, for a day of outplanting, and this is what I tell funders for the most part when they ask this as well, for a day of outplanting, we can put anywhere between 2,000 to 4,000 little corals out there in one day for about 500 or 600 US or 1,100 Belize. So that's the boat, that's the fuel, that's the team of divers, but that's not the real cost, because we're not talking about how long it took to map and source those good corals and grow them up and put them out. So it's difficult to actually, put a real number on it, again, because of the fuel and the distances. But to give you some sort of answer.
An idea.
Right, we can put anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 corals out in an afternoon for about 500-600 US.
So what can I do? What the person sitting at home and say, man, I see these videos, or I remember when I snorkeled the reef, and I can remember how beautiful it was, and I want to join Lisa, I want to join Nicole and Melanie, and I want to help protect my reef. What can I do to help in this fight?
Well, for starters, this week we have been talking to a lot of people, organizations. We try to reach the community in Placencia as well. And so part of the conversation was first seeing how organizations can help us by being eyes and ears out in the water, but people as well. There are a lot of people working on the reef every day, tour guides, tour operators, and even as a tourist. If you are aware of the disease, if you're aware of what it looks like, then you can be a part of the vigilance and report back to us if you've seen it. From there, we can take it. But I think the first step is being aware of what the disease is, what it looks like, and then knowing who to contact if you see it. And then from there are other, like in Mexico, for example, and other parts of the US, there are people working on finding a solution or finding some kind of treatment method. And I don't think that we are going to be doing that at first, but for sure, people who have seen it in the water can let us know. And we have our contact information on a slide where you can contact myself if somebody from Dangriga or higher has seen the disease, and Lisa's information if you've seen it in Dangriga or somewhere in the southern Belize.
And let me just finish answering that. If you're a Belizean, you can contact Fragments of Hope via our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, website, fragmentsofhope.org. We welcome all Belizeans. We've done several years of consultations, and what we are not doing, like some restoration folks are in other parts of the world, is quote-unquote citizen science or volunteerism. So some areas are charging tourists to get involved with restoring the reef and charging a lot of money. We have discussed this over the years, and we do it different. Instead, we train local coastal community members. In other words, fishers, tour guides, students, NGO, park management, fisheries staff, governmental staff. And once you're trained in this process, then you are then paid a daily stipend just as a dive master is. So it's not full time, but it is an income generator. And for that reason, we are not considering non-Belizeans as volunteers. So it's strictly a Belizean organization, so that way we can have the same people being more efficient, doing the work over and over again versus one-time visitors. And also it instills a sense of ownership and pride, so people that have planted a coral 5 years ago can come back to that site and show off their corals. So if you're Belizean, you can definitely get directly involved.
Nice.
And a couple more answers for your just regular Belizean person. What can you do?
Yes.
Obey those fisheries laws. They're there for a reason. You know, the undersized lobster, it's already dead. But when you buy it and it's undersized, that's contributing to, the fishermen knowing there'll be a market for it. If everybody started telling, shame on you, man, taking the baby lobsters.
Yeah.
You know, like we've got to like respect the seasons and the sizes. They're there to protect those fisheries, and you know that the lobsters are important to protect the corals, and it's the whole ecosystem. The other thing, we're increasing the amount that's fully protected within the protected areas. We need to respect those boundaries. The boundaries of the no-take zones are there to let everything replenish inside. So don't cheat the fisheries laws. Everybody should, and your waste, your waste management, both liquid and solid, and sunscreens. Those are easy things that every citizen can do.
All right. Well, let me give Nicole the final word.
Oh, wow.
Your last pitch to Belize and Belizeans about
I'll squeeze this in.
Oh, sure. More than squeeze it in. Tell us about it.
This is our slogan is more corals equal more fish, and this was done by a local artist, Anton Leslie, based in Placencia. And we have these posters and billboards, and at the school's request, came up with interactive learning tools. So this is actually a coloring book that we've made available for everybody because it's a PDF on our website you can download for free, and we've done the hard copies and distributed to the schools. So another answer is educate your children about the value of our reefs as well. And with that, then you can have the final.
Well, I feel like everything we've said this last couple minutes really is the overall message we're trying to bring across, that there are different levels to addressing the concerns that we have. But for the everyday person, paying attention, I think, is something that's very important. Being aware of what's going on, being aware of what you can do, and like we've expressed some of those ways that the everyday person can contribute. So I would personally just like to encourage Belizeans to get involved, pay attention, and definitely do your part. No matter how small, it makes a difference.
And come see the reefs.
Come see the reefs.
Come see the reefs, yeah.
Well, ladies, I want to thank you guys for coming in to talk about something that makes Belizeans stand out everywhere on this rock that is Earth. This beautiful reef that we have. That's all the time we have for this segment. We're going to ask you to stay tuned, to continue enjoying the conversations that we've been having, and we're going to be talking next about leadership. So stay tuned.